Number 2, is it? Number 2. I do have Lyndall going to be late, 10 o'clock. She's going to be here, but Alistair's an apology, so we'll just duly note that apology. He's stuck in Christchurch, and we've got Roger online. So I think everybody else is here. So that's all good. So we'll hand straight over to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Get into it.
So our agenda today, last time we met, we discussed fees and charges and the basis for our hourly rates. Since then, I've built a fees and charges recovery model to what our charges should look like. I'm keen to step you through it. So that'll be the first part of what we cover today. Second part is we've got a proposed item for inclusion in our annual plan budget, which is stock effluent disposal and investing in a stock effluent disposal development. And Hayley's going to talk to that. We'll give you a verbal update in terms of where we've got to with the budget. Last time we spoke, we talked about targeting 4.9% as the rates increase. That would be reflected in the budget. We'll give you a brief update in terms of where we've got to there. And then we'll step through a discussion on the reserves. Jodie's going to lead that discussion. We've prepared a table that breaks down the reserves so that you can see the detail in terms of what's currently in the reserves, and we can generate some discussion about what that looks like. And then the final thing we have is a general discussion item once we've been stepped through those items of business. So we'll lead off with the fees and charges recovery model. And hopefully you've all got a hard copy of it, just in case you can't see on the screen. But if we bring that up, and I'll step through this reasonably quickly, but carefully at the same time. So on the agenda in terms of fees and charges, the first item in this presentation is a comparison of our charges to the other South Island regional councils. So we've managed to pull through the actual charges that the other councils close to us work with. We've run that to a table, and we put our own charges through that table, and I'll step you through that in terms of a comparison. Then we'll move into the baseline model that I've developed, and I'll step you through the components of that model. And then we'll step through what some scenarios might look like if they were run through that model. I'm going to cover science recoveries a little bit separately because they are kept quite separate in terms of how we plan our income and expenditure. And then once we've done that, I'll outline what we would like to put forward to you in the future in terms of some recommendations around tweaking fees and charges. So if we move to the next slide, Jodie, Rebecca. This table here is the actual roll types and their charges for the regional councils in the South Island. Now, there are a couple of limitations here. I just want to call those out quickly. We weren't able to weight these charges for volume, so it's a simplistic average that you see at the bottom of the table. So just need to bear that in mind. The other thing you need to bear in mind with this table is that our GM charges in Environment Southland, we couldn't see comparable roll types elsewhere, so I've excluded them for the comparison. When we get further into the presentation, you'll see that our GM charges are used minimally, and I'll explain what that looks like, but they've been excluded from this comparison. So if you accept those limitations for a minute, and you look at our charges and where they compare, on an unweighted average basis across South Island regional councils, the hourly rate is about $195. Unweighted Environment Canterbury's rate is a bit lower than ours, and then we're a bit lower than the other councils. That's how that compares. So that's just something to keep in the back of your mind as I sort of step through the model that we've got here. So then if we move to the next slide, the next slide is the baseline of this model that I've built. The model has got 4 components in it. There's chargeable person availability, so that's section A in the model, and that translates into an hourly charge of $68 for direct recovery. I'll step through that and explain how we landed on that. Section B, and
I was just going to say, when do you want questions? You might go through it, or do you want to talk specifically now? Or I'm just trying to work out which ones.
Well, I think let Patrick explain it.
Run through and come back. Is that right, John?
yeah,
Okay.
that's okay.
All good.
But very happy to take questions once I've sort of stepped through.
Do that.
Okay, so section A in the model translates into a direct labour recovery cost of $68 an hour, and I'll explain these sections one by one. Section B of the model seeks to recover a proportion of $23 million of overhead cost, and I'll explain how that proportion has been landed on as we step through. Section C explains what our planned income is from fees and charges, and that translates into dollars that translate into an implied 24,500 hours to be recovered at our implied hourly recovery of $191 an hour. And again, I'll step through that. Once I've stepped through that, I'm then going to show you some overhead recovery percentage scenarios and what that would mean, both in terms of what the hourly rate would be, but also in terms of what the impact that would have on the rating increase, whether it would increase it or decrease it depending on the rate of overhead recovery and fees and charges. So that's my intention. So if we move to the next slide. So if we start with the first section, chargeable person availability. So my starting point was that there are 260 working days in a year, in a calendar year. Then what I've done is I've taken off public holidays, sick leave and annual leave, and I've validated sick and annual leave assumptions with our people and culture team. So with the numbers I validated and taking those off, 260 available working days drops to 216.5 available working days. So that's the first input. The second input is that I've taken the average salary of our chargeable people. I've added on the direct superannuation cost, and that translates to salary plus superannuation of 110k per annum in terms of annual plan assumptions. And then in the bottom right of this page, you can see available days translated into hours is 1,624 hours per person. Divide the $110,000 salary by the 1,624 available hours, and you get a $68 charge per hour for recovery. But then the next section of the model, section B, this covers the overhead to be recovered. So this is a model, and I have made some assumptions here. I've made them very transparent. There will be limitations with these assumptions, but they form the basis of the model. So the applied logic I've used is, first of all, science recovers 30% of the cost of running science through completely separate recoveries. So they've got a revenue stream, so I've excluded them in terms of seeking to recover overhead from science. EMS has its own revenue stream, excluded on a similar basis. Integrated catchment has its own revenue stream, excluded. Strategy and regulation covers part-time, and I've excluded them. There is an argument, you could say, that elements of strategy and regulation are overhead and should be recovered in the same way as the overhead I'm about to explain, but for simplicity, I've excluded strategy and regulation. So then what you're left with is overhead for recovery, and I've defined those as the remaining functions: corporate services, governance and risk, office of the CE, and community and engagement. Community and engagement does have some grant income, so again, you could argue that they have some elements of income and may not entirely be overhead, but again, for simplicity, that they are to be recovered through overhead. So accepting those assumptions for a second, the tables that you see on the right-hand side of this page explain people, contractor and consultant, and operational expenditure elements of these functions that are in the annual plan. So you can see $11.8 million at the bottom of the first table, 3.9 at the bottom of the second, and 7.6 at the bottom of the third. And if you go back to the table on the top left of that page, you can see that's the proportion of our total costs in each of those categories I'm calling overhead for recovery. So that's the logic that's gone into the model. So if we go to the next section, section C, what you can see here is the income that we're planning for fees and charges. So the first table on the left-hand side, that shows our total other income as a category. And the items in red are the fees and charges related income, which is a subset of total other income. The table you see in the middle is what those red elements add up to, which is $6.9 million. But then as a third step, what I've done is I've removed the marine fee income because that's levied for a particular purpose and it's spent on a particular purpose. So it's not core fees and charges income. So again, if you accept that logic, then the fees and charges income that we have in the plan is $4.7 million, which is at the bottom table on the right. So then final section, section D, is the recoveries for direct labour. So if you accept that our planned fees and charges income is $4.5 million, our applied hourly rate is $191 an hour, then we've got an implied 23,400 hours. The hourly labour rate that we worked out in the earlier section for direct recovery is $68. Multiply that by the hours that we are recovering, and you get an implied recovery with direct labour of $1,583,000. And you'll see that in the scenarios in the next couple of slides. So I'll step through the scenarios and then I'll take questions before we go through and sort of finalise the presentation. So the first scenario is a 5% scenario. So if we in a scenario where we've recovered 5% of our overheads, then direct labour cost is recovered at 100%, so that's $1.6 million. But we're only recovering 5% of our people costs, overhead, operational expenditure, and contractors in this scenario. The hourly rate would be $115 in this scenario rather than $191. But the impact of this would be that our rates would have to increase. Our rate increase would have to go up by 6%. That would be the corollary to reducing the hourly rate under a 5% scenario. Next page, we've got a 20% scenario. So in a 20% scenario, our hourly rate would be $258, but the rate increase would go down by 5%. Next page is a 30% scenario. Again, equaled out would be the hourly rate would be $350, but the rates impact would be a 12% reduction in rates. And then the final scenario, 50% scenario, we'd be charging $542 per hour, but the rate would be reduced. The rate increase would be reduced by 20%. And then we've got a slide that compares those scenarios. So perhaps before I move to the considerations that we'd like to put forward to you in the near future, happy to take any questions on the content and what.
Go on, if you don't.
Yeah, under contracts and consultants, is that picking up the external, so when we're short on planners, is that picking up the external work that we're putting out for when we're processing consents, or is that more related to what we're employing to do work for us for?
So it is picking up on people we bring in externally, but we've excluded the strategy and regulation function in the model. So it wouldn't pick up on us contracting consent people, but it would pick up on, for example, if we were short of a finance person and we contracted a finance person, that would come into that overhead cost base.
Right, so it's not picking up third-party work that's done to process consent for a ratepayer.
No, because we've excluded the strategy and regulation function from overheads.
Yeah, some of that's answered with Patrick, but I guess I'm wanting to understand their own revenue streams and why they were excluded, like integrated catchment management. I take it that's, the gravel fee, but what else have we got on there that excludes them?
So look, I've taken a very simplistic approach, and open to
understand
feedback, but the logic I've used is that for a fairly large component of the integrated catchment work, they levy rates and they get rates revenue to cover the expenditure of delivering those services. So that was the logic I used to exclude them.
And the strategy and regulation one there, you mentioned part of it was extra contractors.
Yeah, so strategy and regulation, again, because they're directly recovering some of their labour, like when they go out and do fees and charges work, for example. I've used the logic that they're a funded business unit essentially, and I've excluded them.
So what fees and charges are we talking about?
So
probably understand what's in and what's out.
Yeah. So strategy and regulation includes things like the consents function and so on, but there's also some strategy work that they do which could be arguably overhead and could be included for recovery.
So the visiting, the monitoring is in this, isn't it? Is it?
Yeah. So if monitoring work's done and it's charged through fees and charges, then the direct labour cost recovery would pick up that the direct labour cost would drive income from that.
Yeah, the contenting fees are in this model then, is it? All of the things we churn up into the fees.
Yeah. So if somebody turns up, does some consenting work, charges for it, then what I've assumed in the model is that we're recovering the direct labour cost associated with that. So that translates to the $68 an hour, and I'm assuming that that's picked up.
Yes, sorry. Yep. Sorry, I'm studying numbers. Jeff and then Morris.
Yes, Patrick, look, with raising consent, we've got, there's a science component in the fees and charges there. Is that put in there for every consent, or every time there's a fee charged? There's a science component to it, is there?
Yeah, not for every fee and charge, but for a number of our charges, there is a science component. In the last part of this presentation, I'm going to show you the science recoveries. They're completely separate, so we treat them very, very separately. We have a model for science where we seek to recover 30% of the cost of.
Yeah, I see that. So can you just tell me how many staff are in that science department? How would you find that out?
Off the top of your head.
In the order of 30, but I can check.
Right.
prices.
Oh, thank you. Yes, just for my own clarification, not really a question. So we're only charging, fees and charges are only charging people who get charged 13% of the total actual cost when you take into account the overhead. So the salary is actually a relatively small part. The overheads is a much bigger part, about 2/3, 1/3 sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So in terms of how I've built the model, to I guess validate the $191 charge, the direct labour cost is $68, and the rest of it is overhead recovery. And we baseline at 13% of recovering our overhead to get to $191.
So does that mean that the rest, the other people that are not, say person A gets charged this amount, and it's $191, but actually the full amount is something over $500?
No. What I'm saying is that based on the income that we've derived and the $191 average charge, then we've got 24,000 hours that we are recovering. So I've derived 24,000 hours from those two variables. But for what I'm saying is that for every $191 that we're charging, effectively only 68 of it, to you earlier, is direct labour cost, and the remainder to get the 191 is indirect overhead.
So I'm trying to understand what the 13% relates to then.
The 13% is where what I'm saying there is a benchmark model with $191 an hour, and it equates to recovering 13% of what I've defined as those overhead costs in the model. So we've got several scenarios that I've put in there.
Yeah.
The 13% is your baseline essentially. So currently our average hourly rate is $191. The model says that at $191, you're recovering 13% of what I've defined as those overhead costs.
Yeah. 13% of the total actual cost.
13% of the overhead subset of the total actual costs. Yeah.
13% of the total actual cost?
13% of the overhead costs.
Yeah.
Oh, right, not the salary. No,
30% of the overhead costs.
right.
So at the moment, I'm just looking at it. So it's based on around about fees and charges cost. It's about 14 people. You go back to the people, just don't bring it up. How many are involved to get you 191 to recover those? Recover from where?
Right.
So is it going to go back to those, how many people involved, or is it, I'm just trying to go through this myself.
Seems like a percentage of the quote.
Yeah, I'm just, but
So Patrick, would be perhaps in answering Jeremy's question, what you're saying is there's a bunch of occasions within this model where you had to, out of necessity, make some assumptions which sort of create the average number of work days, the average cost of an individual staff member who's working for a certain set of time. And so when people are asking questions like, well, how much does this specifically cost? That could actually in practice be quite variable.
Yeah.
Because you could have a lowly paid person from Gore or a highly educated person from Otago brought in to do it. But because of that averaging effect, those assumptions and averages, some of these specifics are not going to be answerable under this set of modelling.
It's a very fair way of describing it, Phil. I didn't have anything per the first workshop. I didn't have anything to validate these hourly charge numbers, so I had to build a model that reflects what they could look like rather than what they are built on. So.
Yeah. Jeremy? I'd just like to say, Patrick, well done actually for putting something in front of us that gives us transparency over this. It's a very good starting point. The bits that I'm trying to rationalise in my head is that if it was a business, there's plenty of direct competition. So we the only you haven't got any direct comparison really apart from the other councils. And I think of things like, some of the stuff's legislated and has to happen. Now I'm thinking like the scaffolding when it first came in. So I've got a house and we got scaffolding. And I took the scaffolder, and when that charge first came in, he was charging more than $10,000 for scaffolding, but then he was getting no work. And he ended up buying his own and having a charge of $1,500, otherwise he didn't get to work. And like this is one of the areas that does tarnish ES's brand because of some of the bills people get, and they just fall over at how they were made up. So it's great to have something that helps us reflect on that. But guess what it doesn't do is it doesn't, the charges in each of those areas, whether they're like the scaffolding one and whether there's a way that they could be much less. And it seems more about recovering the cost of the people than delivering a service that has a commercial pressure over it. And that's the bit that we struggle with. And like what Phil was saying a moment ago, there is a degree of socialisation across all the numbers. So if you're having a visit to do a water test or something, it's $600 or whatever it is. Mind you, that mightn't be in this model. Is that in the science team, is it?
So some invoices have both. They've got fees and charges from that would be reflected in this model plus the science recoveries. But I'll explain the science recovery to you further in the presentation.
So there's an awful lot to unpack in here to understand it. But I guess on the face of it, this is where a lot of the brand tarnishing, throwing their hands in the air. I think there was an invoice in wintering cost, and it was 17 hours in the background for an air visit.
There's two discussions here.
Yeah.
One, okay, this is how we get the charge out rate.
Yeah.
And it's irrelevant but how do we do business too? Because I'll add that, it's when anybody probably out in the outside world, if they're getting charged $200 an hour, they expect efficiency. You're getting a highly qualified person, and the administration, everything should run very effective. The higher the money, it should be very things should be probably it'd be challenging them if they get a lot of hours and things charge that rate. So, but it's just business. But so that's another discussion that needs to be probably had in regards to how we do it, how we work with people and the administration of this. But as I said, that I'm happy. It's got a bit of transparency of why the number is that high and that's what it costs. But there is another discussion which should be hopefully working along, trying to sort out other aspects of it. Paul.
Thank you, Patrick. I've been quite vocal about doing comparisons, and it's good to see that there is comparisons with other councils. And it also highlighted the fact that we did have a high hit rate that was a bit higher than everyone else. It's probably a good thing that we did those comparisons. It showed that where we are in the mid to low end of the alley rate, we're right. We had a wildly inaccurate one. And so I'm really happy that you've done the work and answered the question, because it was just quite simplistic. If I could get online and any of our rate payers, people getting charged can come on as well. So thank you for that. A lot of good work, and we can break it down more, but I think what you've shown us is great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. The science question 33 FTA.
Any other questions?
Just the one. Jeremy?
Yep. You're on the next call.
Patrick, and you may not have an answer for this, but I thought there would have been a more standardised list of activities the council's worked through. And, looking at the comparison of charges table, it's I suppose your point, there's a lot of detail in the report, and we sit at the lower end of on the average charge. But it's pretty hard to see, or quite surprising to see there's such a variation in areas that the councils address their charges to, if you know what I'm making sense.
Yeah, no, that does. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're saying that there's a lack of standardisation perhaps between us and other councils in terms of what roles, what chargeable roles exist.
Yeah, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying I'm quite surprised there isn't more standardisation across councils. Yeah, it gives, to the point that David's talking about around transparency, it gives a lot more transparency across councils, really. And that, as I say, that's not necessarily something you can answer here. It's just something that's quite surprising. Right. Understood.
Yeah, so no, that's a really interesting observation, but I guess I was just wondering, you know, I imagine that it's different because Canterbury, for example, is a council that operates at a different scale to us, and so they would have a greater opportunity to achieve economies of scale. Plus, because government has divulged to regional councils the flexibility to strike rules and an approach that fits with your geography, they could have quite a totally different mix of rules and things that they are checking for within that system. So I appreciate that there's utility in benchmarking, but sometimes a direct benchmark may not work to allow a standardised approach because of those, one, the economy difference and the very different geophysical physiographics difference in a catchment. I was just noting David's comment about, you know, if you are doing this as a commercial operation, and I just think it's interesting to reflect on the fact that we are not commercial. We have a regulated monopoly. Government has told us that we are the entity that will do this in Southland, so no one else can compete with us. But because we serve our ratepayers in the interest of being transparent, this kind of model is incredibly valuable to us to start to enable people to lift the hood and challenge and question, understand what we're doing. So I just really want to commend you for this effort, Patrick, because this is not America, the land of the free. This is New Zealand, land of what's fair. And if something seems fair to people and they understand it, then I think they're more likely to be accepting of it. And so this is a really, really helpful, good first step to help shine a light on and increase transparency on that. So well done. I guess then the question emerges for us is the debate around, of the scenarios you've developed, which scenario is this council most comfortable with moving forward? Is that the nature of the scenario development, or is that to just reassure us that the existing status quo of 30% is about on target?
I'm hoping you're comfortable with where the 13% is, but there is a slide here where I've got some ideas for future consideration. I appreciate you can't make decisions in this workshop, but I've got some observations for you for future recommendation.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with others that it's very, it's a very good effort, and thank you, Patrick. Really good. Just reflecting on what David asked about, you know, if for us it's a fully commercial operation and there were other people out there providing the same services, then it would be competitive. But as Phil says, it isn't. So we are rather unique. But you know, what we do need to do is make sure that everything we do is as efficient as possible. And make sure that's true. You know, through the Finance and Performance Committee, we can look at those, look at the numbers, and make sure that we're asking every instance is the way that we're doing things as efficient and as cost effective as possible. So that's about all we can do, I think, in that area. But I'm still curious as to why we've gone with 13%. It seems a bit arbitrary to me. I mean, it makes us similar to other councils, as Paul has said, we're about the same, but I'm still a little bit troubled that we are only charging 13% of the overhead costs. And that, to me anyway, I'm not wrong, that means that other people that are not using those services are subsidising that amount.
So the 13% in terms of the model is me demonstrating to you the rate at which you're recovering overhead at the actual charge that we have of $191 an hour. So So I guess the first observation is build a model suggests that because we're recovering $191 an hour, and because of what I've defined as overheads in the model, that your rate of recovery of your overheads is 13%. To Bill's point, if I was to suggest where the rate at which we should be recovering, I'd be suggesting that feels about right. There's in terms of balancing our annual plan and our budget, if we move that up or down, there'll be an implication in terms of what we need to collect from rates up or down as well. So there's a big balancing act to be had if we make changes to it. And I am looking at the other councils and the other regional councils in the South Island. It feels like it's about the right place would be my observation.
There's still a subsidy though, isn't it, for those people that are using the service? Not really.
Well,
There's a judgment call on the overheads.
correct. Yeah.
So the $68 is the actual fee.
Yeah.
But it's how much you're loaded up with overheads, and are those overheads reasonable?
We'll put a couple more questions, Paul, if you're right. Two major points.
I'll get to it.
Maybe the thing is we should challenge the overheads, why they're so high. Paul.
So I can understand that we have overheads on the whole operation over the whole year, and through the fees and charges process through cost recovery, we recover 13% of the overall operating, and that's where I sort of see it. So if we go after more, well then that's not the way it is. You know, rates pay for overheads for other operational parts as well. So getting back to the South Island comparison of charges, thank you for that. Maybe a bit too much information and it's confused the waters a wee bit, but we've got 3 hourly charges here, which is really good. When you start looking at breakdown, you put in stuff there that say EM, that you're not going to include in the ICM side and everything else. You put those out rates there, you know, like river operation supervisor, river operation principal engineer, and in your presentation you've said we're not going to include those, but in the comparison of charges, you probably put them there, and it makes people look at them and think there's all these different breakdowns, which other councils use, which is fair, which is great, but we're just looking at cost of recovery for the work done that relate to those to whatever that we're dealing with. So no, very good. You know, there's also here consent administrative officer, buildings consent authority. Do we even have a building consent?
No, and to your point,
So what you put in here is really good, and it gives you more evidentiary figures to work out what we should be charging. But it's probably nothing to put it all in, and I can pick that up. So thank you very much.
Just for John, Rob.
Patrick, is it, just to help the conversation, is it fair to say that the 30% is fair reflection of the overheads that these staff incur in doing their work?
The 13% is, as outlined in the model, is set by the logic in the model about the services, the parts of the organisation that are overhead because they don't have a direct recovery, revenue recovery. Then we need to recover a proportion of those costs from fees and charges, and we need to recover a proportion of those costs from rates, because we've got two major income sources that fund our expenditure: rates and then fees and charges. So the model's worked out to say, given we do charge on average $191 an hour, to baseline the model, it's reflecting a 13% recovery of those overhead costs. That's all it's saying. It's and then the second question, I think, Morris, in terms of whether that's a reasonable overhead recovery, I then look back and I look at the hourly rates of the other councils, pull that back to the model, and I think it's a relatively fair place to land on. But it is open for debate. You,
Circular argument, really, isn't it? It's a kind of a circular argument, really.
yeah.
I think Rob asked the right question. I sort of get it now that you can't charge the full amount. That'd be $1,000 per hour sort of thing, because the overheads are paid for by other things. I can't quite explain it very well, but I think I'm starting to understand it. Sorry.
John?
Yeah, would it be safe, I guess, would another approach be, what is the cost of business as usual versus consensus? Probably the way of breaking it down simplistically. Would that be a fair approach? And commend your work, it's great. And to Ewan's point around standardisations, you do look at these roles across and you're like, well, a consensus planner is a consensus planner. Is there and this is more of a question for staff, is there an opportunity for, when we look at the whole restructuring of councils, is this being raised with the local government form or whatever around it? How do we standardise roles? Yes, you might do a slightly different job in each council, but I'm pretty certain there'll be staff here that have worked in other councils that could say, well, my role is this, but it's very similar here, which has got a different role. And that certainly would help around doing these comparisons and transparency, because a lot of times a job title is a job title, but the roles are very, very similar.
If I could make, I guess, just an observation, I think there's probably a lot of opportunity for standardisation. So as far as I'm aware, for example, we don't have standard taxonomies that describe the activities that we do, so that there's a consistent definition that's in use across all councils. Just a very specific example, but I suspect that if there was an appetite to, there's a lot of standardisation and simplification that might be possible in the future.
Even delve into that, so I might talk with all the peers in regards to around what everyone's doing in regards to that. David, yes.
I'm wondering, Patrick, how much thought we can put into this before we move forward on it. Because there's a lot of stuff in here to digest. There needs to have some further work done on by each of us. It seems like we've only got the last day or so. And this is a really good answer to a big question that's been around for a long time. As opposed to which scenario we drop on. We've only just got it to actually come up today. Haven't given it the attention that it deserves, given that a bit of a major gripe out there is the way these things happen, and now we've got some transparency on it. Secondly, it seems to me that because of its socialisation, it means that depending on whether you got the office junior or right up the tree, there's the one charge out fee. And, that's not what you see in business at all if you're dealing with, and you see that a little with the ECAN stuff in that they've varied the charge out rate. Maybe. So I'm just, there's a whole lot more questions this opens up, really. And lastly, probably this is the reason why people are looking at local government reform to try and bring down costs. The overhead that you load on this is exactly what we're looking at changing with local government. So, this is the problem in front of us.
I'm just going to make, you've got two here. Just in regards to overheads, obviously, I take it like, okay, the cost of us sitting around the table here must be reasonably straightforward figures. We've got, say, 200 employees, our costs spread it across. That's part of the business. And there'll be a lot of those functions that you have to have spread across all the employees. Then you get down to the bits, well, hang on, the compliance team need vehicles out on the road. And so that's a different discussion. There's not an overhead. There's no specific for parts of the business. They can't be spread over the whole. You get that to indicate the over. I'm just trying to whip it in the overhead discussions. There are some fundamental to have a building, all the building costs spread over everyone.
Yeah. Those
sort of things, but then you get down to down a few levels, and then you start getting specific. There's actually extra costs for that department. But I'm just saying that I know it's not easy, work that out. Then again, there is some straightforward overheads per person to have in this building. Bring clarity on some of that, why the overheads are the way they are, or even to the point that why have we got a percentage there for that that needs to be recovered from that department. So it should be reasonably simple, but not. I suppose I'm just saying, I'm just asking just to clarify some of Morris's understanding, and it should be, if there is a specific overhead cost plus something else in those for that department, well, it should be charged to that department as such. So I don't.
Well, you have to average it.
I'm just saying to get the clarity around what the overheads, how they get there.
The clarity though surely is the charge out fee is $68 or whoever comes on their actual charge. It's how much overheads you lump on top of stuff that's probably, it's.
You might have $50 a head on, if I just turn the lights on each day on per hour. That's life. Nothing changes whether it's just about what you have to have to.
Yeah, I'm just going to observe. David's noted that there is more work to be done for us to understand and get our head around some of this. I guess what I would like to flag is that we've now got 3 months before the end of the financial year, and thus 3 months to lock in our annual plan. And the approach we've taken is we weren't planning to consult on an annual plan. Therefore, the deduction is that for the purposes of the annual plan, the 13% overhead recovery model is essentially what we're doing. And thus, if we want to deviate from that, that's a conversation for our long-term plan conversations in the months ahead rather than the weeks ahead. Is that how you're reading the situation? Because that's my understanding of the situation. We're not really in a space to be messing with this model at this point of the year ahead of our annual plan being locked in.
I think that's a fair observation, Phil. There are a couple of comments to make, and there are a couple of more slides in here. I've taken some advice from Rachel this morning and Jody, and we do need we've got the budget for the annual plan balance at 4.9%, which was what came out of the previous workshop as direction. If we change the rate of overhead recovery, then we're going to need to make changes to the budget for the annual plan, and that may trigger some consultation. We do need to consult on the fees and charges, is the advice that I've got, even though what I'm going to propose to you in terms of fees and charges is relatively minor changes.
We do it every year anyway.
We do it every year. Yeah. But if we made any substantial changes to our fees and charges, there's a direct flow on to our annual plan and budget. Yeah.
I think the thing is we're just asking for clarity how we got. This is helping with how we get to the things. Yeah. Looking at David there. But we'll move, as I say, we can, it's good for you, some of that information. We do have to consult on fees and charges every year. So we will go to the public, but I get a feeling that we're probably not going to be asking for alterations. But I don't like the look David's given me at the moment.
No,
I'm just trying to,
Can I make one point?
Yeah.
I think this comes under the category of what you don't know, you don't know. But once you know it, you can't forget it.
Yeah.
And now that we know it, then surely there is a debate around the loading of the overheads. And it's something that maybe we could get some put out with the fees and charges, this document for some consultation as well going forward, so that people can give us some feedback on it. What would be wrong with that? I mean, this is public anyway. For us to tick it off in 5 minutes, I don't think that's good enough, actually.
I think we could take some heart from the fact that only Canterbury is cheaper than us on the average rate. Everyone else is higher than us, and I would expect that they would benefit from some economies of scale that we don't enjoy given the scale of their operation. So, I would have thought something that we should be reassured by in this instance by the modelling.
I think there's another comparison here too, and the competence of our decision making against Canterbury should be a factor considered in there.
2%.
Yeah, just, I suppose Jeremy touched on it before, Chair, we said, we're two conversations, operation versus how we structure. I think that's a really valid conversation because if we try and do both at the same time, that's where it'll get messy. And probably we do need simplicity. When you get a vehicle serviced, you don't get charged for the apprentice rate, even though it's apprentice on it. So there is a fairly standardisation approach taken a chunk of business in New Zealand already. So we do need to have simplicity, and I think they are two conversations. Having this report's fantastic. Agree with Phil around and the tone there around consultation and timings. And I think that the conversation around efficiencies and how we approach certain strategies around investigating, cost recovery and such like that. That's a completely separate discussion. But I think that's just my thoughts.
So just to David's question around overheads, if we said, oh, well, we want to challenge the overheads and give us a more accurate, and it come back that it's actually 20% needs to be charged, you'd be happy with that too.
Well,
No, this is what I'm just saying.
I've always asked
Obviously,
my friend-
Patrick's given a pretty good
yeah.
view, saying we think this is where that's the 13%.
Well, I guess I don't haven't got my head around whether the overheads are fair and reasonable in the first instance. Therefore, regional councils are being restructured. So that's a whole thing that is happening in this space. So all of the councils, absolutely, factual information like this is really helpful, Patrick. Really good. You've done a great job. But again, my question was, can we actually ponder this longer, or how can we put this without saying in 5 minutes that we just go with the status quo? Because I don't think we can proper debate. We've only just got the information. And now that it's public, I think it's only fair and reasonable to put it to our ratepayers on what we're doing, now that we've got some transparency to put out here.
As we've said, this goes out to be consulted, the fees and charges every year, so that will be part of the annual plan, and then we feedback again. We make the call on are they based on the information we've got too.
So will this go with it, Jeremy?
What we're setting the
This document go out as being how you come up with your fees and charges.
public at the moment. We're in public.
It's public.
So it is public, so people can ask for this and we can provide the information how we got it, which will be good. It's not just for us, it's actually the whole public. We want to be very clear on how we get it, so.
There's nothing to hide.
No, that's what we're trying to do, so. And show that we are asking a few questions about it too, so we're reasonably comfortable with where we're at, I think. And we've got a consultation.
Noting if there's a change in the percentage would mean a change in the rate, which would then be too late to consult.
So I think we're up. Is that all that, or you said you had a couple more slides?
Two more slides. Shall I get through those? So look, some considerations. So I think it would be sensible to remove the general manager hourly charge rate of $394. It's a very high rate. I couldn't see a comparative number that the peer assessment. I'd be suggesting that GMs, if they do charge for work, they charge at the senior consent officer level, which is $237 an hour. And GMs really charge their hours. I polled my colleagues, and my science GM colleague is the only one that charges for work, and that's quite occasional and therefore rare. So I think if we went with that and removed the GM hourly rate of $394, the impact would be well less than $10,000 per annum, and would be worth doing just because that GM rate looked like an anomaly now. The other point I was going to make is, to me, that our baseline to 13% overhead recovery feels okay, and particularly when you look at our peers. And I wouldn't be recommending any major changes to that at this point. I think Bill's point about unpacking that more carefully for the long-term plan could be a good way to go, but for the annual plan, I don't think it makes sense to deviate from that. I was also going to make the suggestion that the feedback I got in the last workshop, and the feedback I think we tend to get on fees and charges, is that the invoices lack transparency. So it feels like there's work to be done there between myself and my GM colleagues to try and get clarity to go with every invoice. I know there've been a few attempts at that in the past, but I think the feedback they're giving us is that an invoice for say $1,700 should show the effort and give some explanation about what the effort is that makes up the $1,700, and there's perhaps transparency lacking by simply receiving an invoice that says $1,700 on it. So that could be a useful place for us to put attention into, I think, as a good organisation. So that was just some considerations. Then I just wanted you to get a quick sense of the science recoveries, because they are a bit separate. So what this table shows is that the planned expenditure for science in 26-27 is $6 million. The science has a recovery model that was implemented several years ago, and we applied every year consistently, where they seek to recover 30% of science expenditure as income. So $6 million, 30% translates to $1.8 million. In the plan, we have income for science of 1.8 tier 2. So science is essentially balanced at covering 30% of the direct costs through the science charges in our fees and charges. But just wanted you to have that information. So that's the last slide on fees and charges.
Questions?
Sorry, there is one.
Do I have any questions around the science recoveries? Can I ask if Doric, we did live on the bit of Karen I'm talking about, was this actually quite low, this part, going way back? Did we lift up a percent? It was 7, 14, 22. Is that the one that we're up to 30%? Is that right? Just to make sure I'm on the same. But we actually have been getting more recovery out of the work that's been done. That's good. Yeah.
Look, I see there that the contractors and consultants at a bit over 1.4 there, Petra. Given that there's 33 people in that department, that seems it's a very expensive department to run. Can we justify that amount of outsourcing there, contract and so forth?
Without trying to put my colleague on the spot, Karen, do you want to give a brief rundown of what we spend in the contract and consultant line?
So we're with a team of 33 people. We obviously don't carry all expertise in-house, which is why we rely on outsourcing on a kind of as-needed basis for the expertise we need when we need it. All of that is broken down across the different projects in the science team. So I can absolutely send you the breakdown of which contracts are going where, but it funds things like the climate change work that we have recently had a briefing on. It's those types of projects that goes to. But yeah, no, it's all absolutely detailed out and can provide that, and it's also been looked at. Well, that is engineered by symmetrical to
Is
the
it
road.
is that like a figure, consistent figure, like just saying one off or anything? It's just, that's what you'd be spending most years, just to give transparency. I'm just,
So it probably has gone up and down, and
Yeah,
it's probably more on the downward side, I think. So, depending on the time period you're looking at, so, there's been investments in science at various times, particularly to support, the going into, proposed Southland Water and Land Plan and the limit setting process. There was an investment in science and economics, to support some of those processes. At the moment, through the current LTP period, there's a real focus on natural hazards and improving science in some of the areas we've not traditionally done much in. So trying to set ourselves up for, spatial planning and some of the legislative requirements there. Through the org redesign last year, though, there was a bit of a shift in the team towards relying a little bit more on our internal capacity, and so that is where you'll see some savings start to come through in that budget, as we bring a greater cohort of expertise into the organisation.
Just a supplementary, you'll be able to give me just off the top of your head with that, the total expenditure for your department is somewhere around that 6 million annually or up or down. Does it vary much?
So no, I think we're reasonably consistent in our spend. The part that gets a bit tricky is the timing of invoicing for us, because we do a lot of our field work and we do a lot of work in the last kind of half, if not the last quarter of the year. And so sometimes we can get a little bit caught out with the timing of when the invoicing comes in, and we struggle to sometimes get that all into the right financial year. So it's just it's managing that part that can sometimes make it look a bit skewed.
if I can add, it's usually around 5-6 million. That's consistency, which is usually an important part of it. They're all good. Everybody, thanks, Karen.
Okay. What I suggest in terms of next steps, so we do need to bring a paper to the council on the 29th of April, the 29th of April council meeting. I was going to propose in that paper removing the hourly rate, having the annual CPI increase, and we then need to get your approval to go out for consultation on fees and charges, and then do the consultation process pre-adopting those limits. CPI, I believe we've at 2.5%, Jody, is that 2.4%?
Okay, is there any other questions in regards to that? I think we've had a pretty good session. Yeah, very thanks.
Very comprehensive.
Yeah, exactly. Here, right. All good?
Right, thank you.
Put that aside.
Now, the Haley's stepped out, so I wonder whether we change the order of the agenda.
Oh, okay. Do you want to cover anything, a quick 5 minutes, or how we do it? Yeah, we'll do 5 minutes and we'll be back here in
Just 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
No.
Okay.
No.
Paul Keflon.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah, some may say that a lot of that's been spoken in this council anyway. At
It's
times.
not gravel though.
Not from the staff, from the council.
So thank you very much for your consideration. A little bit of background to this matter. Importantly, I would note the first bullet point, which there is no legal requirement to have stock truck effluent disposal sites. And the second bullet point, most important of all, there's no legal requirement for the regional council to contribute financially to this project. However, there is a network of these facilities across state highways and on some local roads that are operated by councils. And generally the principle is that councils pay if the facility is located on a local road. However, if it's on a state highway, and we do have one in Southland, which is located at 5 Rivers on State Highway 6, which are very familiar to many of you, there is typically a cost sharing agreement between the relevant council and NZTA Kotahi. So in the case of the 5 Rivers one, it's between ourselves and NZTA. Most of these facilities are on state highways and so have that partnership arrangement. In terms of how the delivery and maintenance of the operation of the facility typically goes, NZTA are responsible for the site acquisition, they'll undertake the survey, they'll do the design work, and they will contract the construction for that. And the basis of the arrangement is typically that there is a strong public good benefit for the presence of a stead, as we call them, not to be confused with Steed Street, another construction project of note, that the construction costs are split between the relevant council, in this case ourselves, and NZTA. So we then have responsibility for maintaining the facility. We pay for that. However, there is funding, financial assistance provided by NZTA to us through the National Land Transport Fund, and then approved through the National Land Transport Program. NZTA continue to maintain the access roads and the associated grounds surrounding the stead facility. So in effect, we pump and dispose of the material that is in the stead facility. Yeah, yes. Indeed. We also generally we require our contractors to also keep the site clean. So when they're going there, they're kind of picking up rubbish, because particularly in the case of 5 Rivers, it's kind of on a preeminent road with respect to our tourism industry, and we want to make sure it's nice and tidy. Don't want the gateway to Southland being a bit gross. So they are, NZTA are now in the stages of preparing a business case for their latest tranche of new stead facilities across their state highway network. And they have now narrowed down to a single site in Lawnville at the entrance to the Alliance plant on State Highway 99. So we drive past it daily and promise to keep an eye on it. It will be constructed. And that's their number one site for Southland. They're proposing a single additional facility in this tranche. I'm happy to take questions on the way through. Chair,
Question about John here.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Hey, so could you explain, so I'm just working through the whole systems because I like always looking for efficiencies. So what happens with the product that's pumped out, and where does that go?
So we have contractors that come and pump it out, and then they take it to suitable disposal facilities. So the cost to us in terms of operating costs of the contractor and the disposal fees. That's correct. Yeah.
And this is disposed into a wastewater treatment plant, or is disposed? So the question I have is, what is there an opportunity to work with communities around? I guess if you look at piggeries and chickens around the globe, and they were built in the wrong spots, and struggled with manure. Why would I have a more holistical view where we could work with the landowner where they get the nutrients on a farm outside of intensive farming in a responsible manner to save the ratepayer, benefit them, and have a cost share facility? Is that an option? There is illegal issues around people dumping stuff and creating challenges, but I'm certain you could.
So, through you, Chair, this is something that has been looked at historically, because obviously mostly waste is a resource, and unfortunately, because of the presence of human waste and other things that shouldn't be in there, when the team have previously explored that avenue, it's not been appropriate. I will, a bit later on in the presentation, just highlight where to next, depending on the direction of what you, the feedback that you give me with respect to the ask from NZTA. We do believe that there's an opportunity to look holistically at stead facilities throughout Yornville. It's certainly staff position that a single additional facility is not appropriate. We need a network of stead facilities in order to protect our environment and provide, clean roads and ensure that the trucking industry are appropriately supported with respect to the disposal of effluent and adhering to our plan. So
supplementary though, I think we have to acknowledge that wastewater treatment plants are not state of the art in New Zealand, and there is a contribution of this overloading them, leading to lower water quality. So I think there's another quite a valid discussion to be had there around if we don't do a holistical, what is the long-term outcome of this?
Through you, Chair, I would agree.
Jeffrey?
Just following on from that question, Chair, for you, Paddy. You mentioned of human waste.
Through you, Chair, it comes through the unlawful use of these by campers. Sorry to say.
Right.
And as we know, State Highway 6 is a key tourism route, and that's expected tourism.
Can that not be monitored though?
Through you, Chair, it potentially could be, and that's something we can.
Trail camera.
Cameras like a bluff.
Sorry, Chair, my original question. Look, just simply do trucking firms, do they pay any sort of a levy for that, or there's no charge to the trucking fee?
Through you, Chair, no, I don't believe so. However, there are privately held forms of these facilities. So, meat processors, for example, who are receiving stock have these. So, I guess our network, if you could call it as such, is a mix of publicly provided facilities and privately provided facilities. It is our staff view that we need both. It is our staff view that the public network at the present time, and even with a facility in Lornville, is insufficient for Southland's needs. Perhaps we could say accidents happen.
Thank you.
And we want to make sure that the environment as a consequence.
Eric and then David.
Thank you, Chair. How are priorities decided as to where these are needed? Because I would say there needs to be some consideration on Highway 96 going into the Tionia Basin, which is one of the major cattle wintering programs for dairying. And at the end of May, early June, there's a green line up this side of Gorge Hill heading to the basin. And in late July, there's a green line coming back the other way. And that's also a very prominent tourist route. Some consideration needs to be given to something there.
Through you, Chair, we would absolutely agree. The last time that this analysis was run was unfortunately 2014. NZTA have decided that this is the location for this facility, but the work that I've alluded to that we would like to do post the direction and feedback you give us today would actually run a fulsome analysis. And in fact, actually the wintering of stock was the reason why they decided the Five Rivers location in the first instance. So we think that that work needs to be done. It needs to be done in a contemporary sense as farming practice, and the movement of stock has changed substantially since that original analysis was run. We think also we have a fantastic opportunity coming up to do that in the regional spatial plan. And so that would be our intention, to run that alongside that, so that we can then ensure that we have a network that suits what is happening with respect to farming, that suits the trucking industry, and where they're moving, what, when, why, what frequency it works.
Thank you. Lyndall and then Paul.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've formulated a clear question at this point because I'm a wee bit confused. But the resource consents required for these would sit with NZTA through applicant, yes, and that covers construction,
Yes.
and there would be conditions around keeping it clean and tidy, correct?
There's a memorandum of understanding for the Rivers site between the NZTA and the Regional Council, and that's who is responsible for much.
And the Southland District Council have no role in this because it's a state highway, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. Sorry, go that one, Budding. In some regions, the territorial authorities are responsible for these sites. However, at the time that Five Rivers was set up, it was determined that it was actually a Southland entire issue as opposed to just the Southland District. So where a site is being proposed in Invercargill, the benefit isn't necessarily just held by the Invercargill district, it's actually held by the wider region. And for that reason, it came to the regional council to hold that on the basis that we are all the same ratepayers, covering that through the regional council. In some regions, the regional council might be billed for it, but then they pass it on to the local authorities. But for this site, it is one part of the regional council, the official regional good, as opposed to just a district. Thanks.
Sorry, we got sidetracked. Did you have your question?
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay,
I think
no.
you said but anyway.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah, Hayley, I have been involved in these quite a bit and been to lots of meetings on them. There is a very good network in Otago, and this stuff, federated farmers often ran campaigns about emptying their stock out. So, and had people bringing their stock in when the truck was coming, and they wouldn't even pick them up. So the first thing's to empty them out. Second thing that we found out with us is that actually if you get a lot of rain, it can fill the tanks up. So if you get a lot of rain, which you often do, and then they're full, well, what are you going to do? And that's why you need a network. So I guess the question is around Alliance Lawnville. It's going to be in a position where any other trucks going to South Pacific Nets or whoever could use it. So it's not just because that seems a bit off the beaten track.
That is correct, yes.
And then secondly, what happened to Matera? Because Matera was always a thing, because a lot of cattle go towards Matera, and that's another area that's, as you say, a network thing. So that's not being looked at all, because it was pretty close at one stage.
Through you, Chair, they have funding for one.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so that this is the top of their list, but it is up there. There have been, my understanding is that since the period since they last built Five Rivers, they have been investigating the quota, and there have been some complexities around site selection, and that had meant that that elevated the Lawnville site outside Alliance to number one. Sometimes best project, you can't find the site for the best project, it stops being the best project. And so the complexities around site selection bumped it down the list.
It doesn't mean that.
Doesn't mean that we don't need one there. And yes, exactly. That certainly does not negate the need for a stead facility in Dakota.
But I
You
think Otago's got, is it 6 or
Yes, we're a
something?
bit jealous.
Yeah.
We think that there's a strong environmental reason, and it also is supportive of the rural sector and our trucking industry as well, to have in-net facilities. Absolutely. Shall I jump on?
Paul, then Morris, and then myself.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a huge big subject, and I look at the end of the day, I can sit here and look at maps and know that we've got 5 rivers. Is it ideally the best place for something? I know that Mataura is under investigation, and sure, Otago have a number of these disposal facilities, but they're on one route. They're not up the centre, they're on the coast, they're on the main route. Are these in the right place? NZTA sell a service to every road user. You know, they collect through the government road user charges, they collect tax on fuel, they collect all this sort of stuff, and it's their responsibility to make sure that they're environmentally correct in the service they provide. It's probably our responsibility to regulate them and say, hey, you need to put more in, because you know they're the ones supplying the roads for the industries and for the people to move stock around. If their service isn't correct, they shouldn't have to come to us to ask for money. They're collecting enough money off everyone, and especially at the moment off everyone, because every time the fuel price goes up, the percent dollar value of tax collect goes up. So I don't know if the disposal facilities are in the right place. They're on a main route, of course, sure. And with regards to Councillor Roy saying we're green going in and out of the gorge, well, you're right. I've rung up transport companies who I've followed with my car covered in excrement going up the gorge hill and said the number plate is this and the tap's open. It's not coming out of an overflow. It's coming out of the fact that your driver hasn't put its shutters tap. So I look at it in clear, simple terms that we need to look at it and say, NZTA are responsible for the service that they're charging for. They need to put these things in. And we as a regulator need to say, well, if you haven't got enough, you're not supplying the service and you're actually causing detriment to the environment. Go for it. Let's get tough with it. We're all paying for it. Why do we as a regional council have to put any money towards that? Sorry, Jeremy, my rent.
Right. Sorry, Morris.
Well, I certainly have sympathies with what Paul says, but I don't know if the organisation that provides the road should be paying for it. I certainly don't think that the average ratepayer here should be paying for it. The people that should be paying for it are the trucking companies, because they are producing the effluent. If you're an industry and you produce effluent, you pay for the treatment of it. You don't get the ratepayer to pay for it. And I know you've got agreements throughout the country. I know that when I was in the council earlier, we had big arguments about this as well, but it's quite an unjust thing for ratepayers to have to pay $345,000 for this when it's effluent that's produced by a commercial business that has ways, we've already said, the ways to reduce it. They don't apparently bother to do that. So I know that it's something that we have to agree to, but I do have serious concerns about it. And I don't think it's just paid for by the wrong people.
Sorry.
If I may, just to be clear, we don't have to pay for this. There is no legal requirement for us to pay for this. And later in the presentation, you'll see I've had to correct the dollar value that's being requested by NZTA. Subsequent to us amending this presentation at 9 o'clock this morning, there was a conversation with NZTA and they've clarified the ask is actually between 1.2 and $1.5 million.
For our share.
Our share.
Our share of the project share.
That's what the project costs.
Yeah.
And originally, what we understood this morning is that we contributed to the construction and the pipes and the tank. Now they're looking at a share being for the whole
the whole project as opposed to the 345.
And add to this and give you a bit of context, obviously, at some stage, can't remember when it was basically saying you have to catch all your effluent on the trucks, because it didn't used to get caught, it was dribbled everywhere. But the fundamental problem, you go, well, what do we do with it? And there was never a system in place. Obviously, I think the fresh works, they do dump, looking for a bit of support. But Rob had indicated, I think, going to the freezing works, but I know the freezing works don't want to know about anybody else's effluent if it's not associated with their industry, which obviously a lot of trucks were heading into Otago and other places for grazing. That added another load when the dairy industry came in. But one thing it is that it's actually probably sitting around the Regional Transport Committee, Otago are very good at pointing at us and can't believe they're almost accepting all our effluent when the trucks are going up there and we don't have any places down here. So it is a bit embarrassing that for the amount of stock, we're one of the largest industrial sites, meat producing sites, there's big sites in industry, that we don't actually have this. And I have followed enough trucks up through to Queenstown on a nice wet day and getting covered in effluent, to be honest. And I wasn't very supportive of an industry I'm involved with. So the cost of this, it's not Joe Blogg's public, it's actually an industry thing, and I do feel for if we're funding it, because it's it's not a I don't think it's a spread across the community problem. It's actually within an industry that has a problem, but we do need them. That's what we do need them, because I think we're actually not playing ball with what, as either it's an industry or as a region. We're actually failing another region that's associated very closely with this too. So, but I do feel who pays is an interesting one. So that I know it has been brought up at the Transport Committee quite often.
Can I ask a point of clarification around the Otago network and how it was?
Hang on, David, sorry. Got Eric Lindell, and then you can go over that.
Yeah, around me.
Paul again. So you're on second goes.
Me now? Right.
Yes, go for
Right,
it.
thank you. Look, we all see the problem and no one wants to put their hand up to solve it. My question is, what exists in terms of a penalty regime if you're caught doing spillage on the road? Is there anything there at the moment, and how many prosecutions have there been? Needs to be able to focus on this.
Through you, Chair, yes, absolutely, and there have been prosecutions. As to the exact number, I would need to get that information to you. But yes, absolutely.
There is a penalty regime.
Yes, yes.
And is that by prosecution or by a set charge, or how?
Full range of enforcement outcomes is available to us with respect to that, and we have undertaken them historically.
All right, thank you.
There's quite a history to this. Back when I first started, there was some attempts to regulate, and there was some police and environment Southland roadblocks checking trucks. It was found to be ultra virus, so it was quite difficult to try and navigate that. So it's a pretty fraught process. There's some potential, but actually to do it, it's quite professional.
Right. Okay.
But we do respond to incidents as they are.
Right.
Right. Lyndall, Paul,
Thank
John.
you. Two questions. Well, a statement first. The important part that we haven't mentioned is the subsequent maintenance arrangements, because that's an ongoing cost. And
could you flick to the last slide?
Given the comments from my colleagues earlier, not so sure about that. The question actually is, are there any international examples of alternative technology for partial on-site treatment within the tanks? Because that to John's point about overloading the wastewater treatment sites.
Through you, Chair, actually when I first came to this matter, I had assumed that there were on-site sewage treatment plants, and that's why the facilities were so expensive. And I was quite surprised actually to realise that this was a pump and dump type arrangement. So very low tech, but have, as an established network that works well, sometimes simple technology is the best technology, acknowledging, of course, Councillor Pemberton's point, which we do agree with as staff. So we are thinking that post the feedback we get here, whatever happens next with respect to this ask from NZTA and this facility, we would initiate a piece of work as part of the regional spatial plan that would look at both the technology, to your point, Councillor Ludlow, but the location and what is the right mix of public-private arrangements that balances a number of tensions around polluter pays, exacerbator pays, receiver pays, all of those types of principles around how these things can be paid for, recognising the existing work that NZTA does up and down the country. It's clear there is a wide range of agreements about how these come into being and how they are funded in terms of the operation, and the numbers are up there in the slideshow in terms of that OPEX cost to us ongoing, and it is in our current financial year, and we're on budget, and it's in the next annual plan as well. So this is something that's kind of a BAU arrangement, but we do want to start up this project that will look at all these kind of key aspects, including the technology around, and then that will look at not just the capital cost, but also the operating cost, depending on what that technology cost is. So, and also our desire for coverage. So it'll be trade-offs though.
Right, Paul and John.
It's quite easy to bring up the map on your computer when you look under NZTA. Ultimately, if you look at the bottom eastern corner of New Zealand, South Island, sure, we have 5 rivers, we have Blakey Road, we have Rays Junction, Ellison Road, Ellington. We have quite a few there going through on the main routes. And but then you look at the west coast, you've got Hokitika and Murchison. That's it. So you're looking at another area where there's a lot of intensive farming and a lot of stock transportation. So I personally believe, as a regulator, can we do roadside testing at waterways at certain peak times of the year when stock are being moved to check whether this is an issue being caused by NZTA's lack of initiating effluent facilities for stock trucks, which are their customers. They're not our customers, they're their customers. And I know that just looking at the map, they're all talking about we've only got one in Southland. There's actually quite a lot around the area that the transport goes through, the main thoroughfares. And then there's Waikora's got one, Blenheim's got one, Nelson's got one. There's a hell of a lot of area there without these disposal sites. So have a look at the maps, and also have a look at they also have a map there where they say being planned, and just the disposal facilities being planned. And in actual fact, the North Island's pretty rich, to be honest. So we've, Matera's one, Jackson's, Reefton. So there are some being planned. So have a look. I think this is absolutely ridiculous that the government department are asking for our assistance.
Just quickly, are we 600k of that?
Yes.
1.2, potentially.
Potentially 1.2.
Yep. John.
Thank you. So just a question, obviously it's been brought up around the industry coming up with solutions. Now, there's already a lot of infrastructure in Southland that's just privately owned. What barriers are there for dairy farmers or people with effluent systems to receive products? So at a pinch point, because there's no point pointing the finger, we're going to go through another autumn and spring of this. We're not going to fix it tomorrow, but is there some quick fixes where people that are willing to help contribute to resolving this can receive, because they're not talking massive volumes per truck, just high concentrations of nutrients. Once again, holistically some of the solutions.
Through you, Chair, that's something I would actually need to have discussions with our NCT compliance teams to come back with an answer on. But certainly we need to fold that into the work that we'd like to do. And it's also, I think, there's an existing network of private facilities as well, so there's something we can do there. So there's a number of questions, I think, beyond, above and beyond this initial ask from NZTA that need to be answered quite quickly by a holistic piece of work, which Liz and I have been talking about and kicking that off post this workshop. I mean, certainly we were pleased that, not that I want to sound like great crumbs, but that NZTA agreed to do an additional facility. It's been a long time since Five Rivers opened, and it's great that they have managed to, find their way to find money for this one. But we want to do much more, and we work obviously in partnership with them. We'd like to initiate, a much better relationship with the trucking industry to start to explore what their needs are, where they see the gaps, where they see the challenges, to assist them as well.
David, have you got anything?
Well, I can just add clarification on what John was saying. I mean, we've thought about that in the past, and the reasoning is because of biosecurity, of putting effluent on dairy farms. Fonterra won't accept it. Again, with the human thing, they won't accept that. So, potentially there is an issue there. So the camera thing for humans seems like a good idea to somehow help that. But on the network thing, if you don't have a network of where they do go, you end up with someone fly and you start charging people, you'll end up with it getting dumped. And there was instances of that in the past, and that's not pretty. So that's pulling down the gravel road somewhere and just letting it go. And we don't want that either. So
I've had that dumped on my gravel road, and I wasn't very impressed by it.
exactly.
As a farmer, I don't know why. So it does happen, but that's only one off, which I was one of the time. We've seen it. Just in logistics, obviously Lawnville deals with one as major industrial site, but logistically the Matara site was always a more central. I was heading to Central Otago, a lot of more movement. But it does, I think the works have been asked, well, why don't we pay you to sort it out? And they basically said, we don't want to deal with anybody else's. But it would actually make sense they have facilities to deal with this. But we've got a 600k is a bit different, 300k. And then there's the point of who actually pays it.
I mean, it is, I know, Chair, we did try and explore whether it was possible to have this as a capital investment, but unfortunately it's not. It's required to be a operational expense. So we'd be
Can we suggest that other parties need to be asked what they need to contribute, industries, and see that would be the question the community would be asking. I know people would go exactly why are we paying for this. Long-term plan, I've just been told, had a great idea. Yeah, LTP.
This proposal is in the NZTA budget for this next financial year. We've got no assurance that they can pass it on into the next.
It's a good point, because generally, as we know, generally when you get a thing in there, you want to take it because it's why not?
Through you, Chair, it's one of those one-time only deals.
Yeah, but in the long-term plan, if we can make it, if we're looking at long-term plans, depending on how it gets paid, this one's not what we need. We actually need a network. And I think Southland, to be honest, we're actually letting the rest of the country down a wee bit in regards to how many stock gets moved around, especially our neighbours. So, Paul, very quickly, and then
Find me a ratepayer that wants his rates back up to pay for these facilities.
well, that's what I'm saying.
Right, you will not find that. And if we accept this as a cost and put it in our annual plan or long-term plan, as a ratepayer, I'll make a big deal out of it, because this is just ridiculous. This is absolute terrible. So I would not even entertain the idea and I really feel strongly about this. There's not one ratepayer, I would not want any retired ratepayers paying towards effluent disposal sites within our region. It needs to be sorted by NZTA, and they need to get on their bandwagon and get it going.
No, it's a pretty good point. I think that's why we're getting a wee bit of
Yes.
feeling. Lyndall, then you feel.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm grateful for not having to follow stock trucks in quite the same manner I used to when I was younger. But my question is, would a set, if we suggested a set maximum contribution, would that be acceptable? Should we not be able to get out of it completely, if we set a ceiling?
Through you, Chair, we could absolutely take that into NZTA. We're in constant communication with them at the moment, you know, as I said, as up to date as just a few hours ago, so we would be happy to take something like that.
I mean, I'm not disagreeing with the fact that
Obviously,
ratepayers shouldn't be paying necessarily, but the fact that we may have to in some weird way, if there's a ceiling, at least we're not overcommitted.
Phil?
I'm just going to observe, we've said it may be a one-off only offer, but there's no guarantee that it may not reappear. It could be something that is investigated in future financial years. And at a time when the government is signalling, you know, rates capping, etc., to come to us with this unplanned funding at this rate, I think we can send messages through the Regional Transport Committee that we need to collaborate and cooperate far more effectively than this, so that these sort of surprises aren't dropped on our lap. And I think we should have probably established a precedent in this case saying, thank you, but it's not going to fit with our cycle of financial planning in accordance with our constituents' expectations.
It's a nice way.
Bit of you're getting a feeling for where this is going. You're getting
Thank
an
you,
idea.
Chair. We are. It's very helpful.
There's a few more questions asked and a few more. I hate saying no to government money.
And I appreciate that we can benchmark against our neighbours who you could argue in other respects aren't investing in possum control, for example. Do we take all the money out of our possum control areas and put it into effluent disposal sites, and then we can benchmark more effectively against a target, for example, on this issue?
Good point.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Which one are we using? And actually look at it. We'll just move on. Yeah, we'll just carry on to the latest budget update.
So next up on the agenda, just before we get into a presentation on reserves and show you what our current reserve balances look like. I thought it would be a good idea just to do a quick update in terms of where we've got to with budget dealing plan. So following the last workshop, we've got a strong signal from you of 4.9% rather than 5.6%. We've now completed our GM by GM review using our budget accuracy approach, and we've now got a budget that balances at 4.9%. So we've got it to where it needs to be. The reason we wanted to now step you through the reserves, we want to sort of update you on the reserves policy. We've got a table of what the current reserve balances look like, and in theory, there are some levers you could pull around reserves if you wanted to improve the situation further. But Jodie, who's going to step you through the presentation, and in a finance capacity, has pulled out to me that we need to be really careful. And clearly some of our reserves are for specific purposes. And we want to show you what the reserves look like. We've got some caveats about how they could be used, but wanted to give you the opportunity to see them and open that conversation. So that's the purpose of this next section. So, Jodie, are you comfortable to step through the presentation?
You with me? First workshop, so
Good.
we'll see how it goes. So to start with, we've gone through the actual policy, Finch Reserve policy. We thought it would be good just to outline and remind everybody of the what we're actually sticking to as part of this process. We are aware that this policy will be reviewed as part of our LTP process, so also a heads up on that front. This will be back in front of you in the near future. So some of the underlying purposes around that, managing inter-year surpluses and deficits. We acknowledge through the way that we rate and fund some of our activities, there are ups and downs, seasonal work, etc., particularly through our catchment space. So historically, we've funded those knowing that there's cyclical movements, and so as you're well aware, we have those balances that are held for those events or anything else in particular that may arise during each of the cycles. We've got our future commitments around particularly our asset replacement, for example, our vehicle renewal schedules, things like that. And just on that note, we are bringing to you a paper in May around our vehicle proposal and renewal for the next financial year, just so that you're aware that that's coming up as well. The buffers around our emergencies and natural disasters, quite a few of our rating district areas have disaster reserve funds, which are specifically held for those purposes. But separate to that as well, we've got our emergency management entire area, so our joint venture of the emergency management. So our EU share is held in class as a disaster reserve, which has a minimum holding plus our EU's contribution. And then as well, part of this allows the ongoing support around our intergenerational equity, which is quite a key principle around some of that funding, around our asset replacements, and making sure that the people that are paying for it are receiving the benefit and that we allocate that correctly. Okay. So this sort of goes into slightly more of the principles around that, around what we've sort of said around those financial viability, the sufficient funds and all of that kind of thing around those unplanned events that, as we all know, occur and somewhat occur more frequently. The intergenerational equity, which we've covered, asset replacement, strategic response, and the transparency actually, which I think is quite critical as a council. The way that we've got all of our reserve categories broken down means that we're reporting and recording them in that manner. So at any point in time, we can provide that more extra layer of transparency to anybody that's actually reviewing it, and that is also published through our annual report on an annual basis. Okay. So we've got some of the types of reserves, because again, just going into each of those categories briefly, we sort of through our last LTP process, we identified 3 key areas, but special reserves covers quite a few different categories. So I'll just sort of clicking through some of those, carry on through that one. And getting into those purposes, it's sort of what I've already covered, I guess, around the funds being set aside for those key areas. And that's sort of the breakdown around those lease areas, rating districts, disasters, etc. And then each of these goes through some of that purpose underlying those reserves and what they're actually held for. So, for example, as you'll all be aware, the lease area reserves are generated through the lease income on those particular lands that we own. And so therefore we allocate that back in either to those lands or it is available for council decision around usage. The rating districts, which is actually including both the river areas and the drainage areas, which is specifically funded for that, which is covering both of those. We've got our disaster reserves there, asset reserves, coastal reserves, which is one that I know is quite often an area of discussion, which is including our marine fee as well as our actual coastal rentals reserve. Both of these are actually funded specifically, I should say allocated specifically through policy. So I know that the coastal one has a specific policy. There's references in there to, I think, the 64A of the Resource Management Act around how we can allocate those and what they can be specifically used for, which is only for coastal activities. And then we go into sort of the more generic catch-all areas around our accumulated surplus and our general reserves. So the general reserves are free for other uses, essentially, but currently, which you'll see through the more detailed breakdown later on, the current general reserve has actually been largely utilised in previous years, and that was one of the methods around our LTP in that conversation around building the future financial sustainability and wanting to rebuild some of those reserves for that rainy day event, which I'll go into slightly later, but yeah, there's certainly more things that we could be in that decision space to think about. So this is sort of covering around how we use those reserves, those limits, replenishment, etc. You as councillors have the overarching decision around our use of reserves, whether we're setting up any new ones, how we're using them, and transfers. Typically that comes through council decision via our LTP process. We do obviously have a review as part of our annual plan, but largely we set that through that LTP, which is more of that longer term view on usage. The limits, I know there is some of our reserves that would appreciate to hold minimum balances, like the marine feed reserve, I should say, to hold 1 season of expenditure, that kind of thing, and that's part of our ongoing discussion with our overall policy of making sure that we've established those reserves balances correctly, which is again a discussion for around this table to make sure that we've got those to the right level of comfort, for risk and appetite within the current council. And the replenishment framework within our policy is that ideally if we are using any of these reserves and they go below those minimum balances, that we make a conscientious effort to bring those back up to meet those balances within the 3 financial years, which is 5-year term, essentially. So breaking on from that. Thank you, Rebecca.
A couple of questions. Just in regard, obviously the land sus reserve is now catchment integration.
Yeah.
So just has there been large funds put into that? Is there different? That was just by the end of this 3-year period, we were going to be down to about 700 or 800 grand. We were always going to have about 700 grand in those two. I know the biosecurity one's heading that direction, but what we consulted on, what we've used, but it seems to have gone up.
Yep.
So can you explain that?
Yes, we do have in the separate sort of handout there as well, we've got a wee bit more of a breakdown of each of those specific areas under those accumulated surpluses on page 3 of that handout. So within the catchment integration, and apologies, I do tend to call it land sustainability by mistake, it's named there. Catchment integration, we had through the LGP budgeted to use a section of those reserves for allocated purposes, including an allocation across to Thriving Southland, which I know is an ongoing discussion, or future discussion. Within how we actually allocated that in the last financial year, because the balance of funds wasn't overly spent, as you'll recall, we came out in a better than budgeted position. We didn't deem it appropriate if we haven't spent in that area to still apply the reserve. It's important that the reserve is allocated for the usage that it's intended. And so it didn't seem right to just offset our general rates by plummeting that reserve if it wasn't necessarily the work that was completed. So we try and keep it fair and stick the reserves to what they're used for. So hence why the reserve there has actually increased. That has now changed. It is no longer a targeted rate, whereas in the last financial year it was 50-50, and we've now fully changed over to 100% general rate for this. So that reserve will not continue to grow unless it is allocated as a decision of council to specifically grow that reserve.
So just to be clear, in the end, we were intending to have it down, trying to say, have we allocated, what are we going to use of it this year? For the budget for this year.
Yeah, in the current 25-26 year,
I'm talking about going 26-27. Is that the bad balance? This is the balance as of 2026, the June, the end of this financial year.
The forecast balance.
1.2 million.
Yeah.
Are we going to use 500k of it next?
There was probably planned for 200,000
in line with the prior 200,000 allocated over
Yeah.
those first 3 years of RTP.
So,
But then there's a separate conversation around.
so there's more money in there that we could use to fund the land integrated catchment integration to be in the same as we were going in their long-term plan.
Yes, there is. There's the,
That's what I'm asking.
but it is partially allocated as well for the freshwater farm plan ongoing work.
Right.
And so, I'll need to give a better breakdown of that in terms of 26, 27.
And at the end of the day, that's also, like, it's still being rated. It's money that probably should have been spent. It was rated. I mean, that's what I remember the discussion a few years ago saying, hey, we just haven't spent this. We've rated for it.
Yes.
And we haven't spent it. So it sits there and you go, well, we should have actually spent it. And so there's no reason why we have just the current.
It was just, it was making sure that rate that was a targeted rate for that specific purpose remained for that specific purpose.
There's no harm in actually using them. Like, if we don't have a minimum for it. It's just spare money, basically. Well, technically it's been rated and has been used. Not like a disaster reserve, I'm just saying.
And again, that's sort of that earlier indication of what Patrick was implying there, that I'm quite keen on of being mindful of future spend. If we're allocating all of our reserves now, we do need to be very mindful that, with the potential of rates capping and everything else, it will limit our options in the future. So yes, we have rated for it.
That's a different reserve though. That's
it's all of our reserves.
I know, but this one is, I'm just saying, it's actually been work that has been done.
Yeah.
We've rated for it. We're saying we're going to do the work and we haven't. That's where it sits, and the land sustainable is. Just the other one is the vehicle renewals. That's the, I know we talked a bit about that. Is that going to be sitting at, I'll say 737 is it after? So that's your depreciation or your vehicles. So we did talk about that a wee bit, whether don't think we ever go under 500,000 or something in their reserve. So there's always seems to be spare money sitting there too. So there could be a year where we didn't need to put it to side. We should be using, just trying to allocate the funds. I know it's appropriate to have these reserves. But has anybody got any other questions?
Just to clarify, the whole reason we're having this discussion today is to make sure we understand how the reserves are configured heading into the annual plan budget, and suggest what you're looking for is guidance from councils that we're comfortable with the current reserve arrangements, as opposed to councils advocating for significant change that would then have a flow-on effect through to the annual plan budget. I'm assuming that's the purpose of this discussion today. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think just to clarify, in the last workshop that we had, we were given guidance to work towards 4.9%. At that time, we didn't know that we could achieve that through just budget accuracy. So there was the potential that we could look at the reserves and carefully tipping out some reserves that may be available for distribution to get to 4.9. We're now at 4.9%. If you had the appetite to take it down further than 4.9%, an option for you is that some of these reserves aren't tagged to specific purposes, and you could look at your reserves to get down further. We're not proposing that you do, but there is that option there, and there was a comment made in the workshop that some transparency about what's in the reserves would be useful to see. So those were the reasons.
So, okay, now thank you. That's helpful to clarify that. And the reason I asked that question is because I still feel quite new and naive to regional council work and the function of reserves within that work. Because I guess in the short time I've been on council, I've yet to see the full range of disasters hit us that we play out in our mind as being potentially out there to impact how we do business. Although I know things like a pandemic have been a recent one. My instinct tells me when I see this range of reserves going, bloody hell, we're carrying this many different disparate risks as an organisation, that we have to constitute this many reserves to me, it seems at face value, as a naive observer, a little bit excessive. And my question becomes, is this something in the LTP sense that we want to revisit in more detail as we approach the LTP, going, we probably need to be a bit more strategic and understanding, one, when was a reserve established, for what purpose? Does that risk still exist in the same form? And is there potential to, because I imagine if you have a reserve constituted, there's an element of we need to keep it sufficiently liquid so it can be realised and applied at relatively short notice should that risk emerge.
It's cash backed by the managed fund, which is near liquid.
Yeah. And I imagine if it was less liquid, you could potentially get a greater return on that investment.
We do invest the fund to get the greatest return we can with a balanced portfolio of investment, balancing for us. But the guidance we've had from the investment advisor is, as well as getting the liquidity of the interest and dividends, we needed to liquidate the fund. We could put the equities on the market and get a price for them immediately. So the whole fund essentially is pretty liquid.
Yeah. So I guess I'm just forecasting is I would probably be keen to return to this in the LTP period.
Right.
I would expect that you could have a spreadsheet like this with a link to every particular reserve, link on it, click on it, and it would tell you this was established on this date for this specific risk. It has been deployed in the following amounts on the following occasions for the following reasons, so that we can interrogate each of these reserves and understand, is it still relevant? Is it still relevant to hold that amount in there? Is it sufficient to cover the risk that we anticipate that might arise from the purpose it was established for? Is it excessive or is it insufficient? Because I suspect that right now we don't, certainly from a governance level, we would struggle to interrogate the system to that degree.
Jody, your view on that? My view is that would be a good exercise to step through the LTP.
Yeah. But others may have different perspective. Others might say, geez, we've got way insufficient reserves. We need way bigger reserves. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll comment on later, but John, David and Lundell.
Yeah, look, I know the last LTP I raised a question to what Phil's saying and sort of felt it got parked. I guess my concern is waiting to the LTP. You talk about a pandemic. I think we've actually got a bigger wall coming towards us, which does speak to the liquid funds. And I think we have to have a conversation sooner because we've got exposure around liquid funds and we've got exposure around not having a policy in place to act if things play out in the Middle East to severity for us to react. So I would like us to be more strategic in our thinking rather than waiting for something to land in our lap before we get to the LTP. I think we're very exposed, and I think we are not anticipating the challenges that are coming our way. As a business owner, I'm seeing it very, very quickly, and we're making a lot of moves to protect ourselves for the next 12 months. But this could go well beyond that. So I just want to really raise that as a concern.
David?
Yeah, just wondering, Jody, under the last CE, I remember there was talk of building more reserves and more funds in all areas. So where are we with that? And secondly, when you look through this, the way I understand it, so each of the liaison groups has a running account, and that was the credit balances thing. And then they have a reserve themselves, which helps do when you have the 2020 event come down the Matara. And then, of course, we have a regional disaster reserve, which was the 2 million, and that would be the set amount to cover it. And I remember when we were talking about all of that, then we said over and above that, if it's something bigger than Africa, you got the government. And if you have too many reserves, then you don't actually, you got to use these first. So, I mean, people pay their rates, not to us to be putting excessive amounts aside when they're struggling to pay rates. But I guess the policy about building reserves across the board, has it changed, I guess? Are you building little funds in the budget just in case? I guess that's the question.
Essentially, no, we're not.
Yeah.
So, this is sort of what I was trying to hint at earlier, was around that building up of that general reserve, because we've actually completely used that in prior years. So that was part of the LGP taxation, was to rebuild that specific reserve, because it's not actually flagged specifically to anything like what the grading areas are. So it would mean that in the event or anything like that, we've got that back up and we would more of that resilience in place. Yeah, so that would be the reserve that I think that would be referring to.
Lyndall?
Thank you. Much of it has been kind of touched on, but my less cerebral take on it, yes, than that's what Morrison's cerebral explanation. You know, using up our reserves impacts our investment portfolio. So it's just really basic. But I think future-proofing this, and to your point about building up reserves, most of that conversation in my mind was actually about diversifying our risk, and that involved, you know, other investment things that and assets that we have. So it wasn't just about building up reserves necessarily. I have been on about it for many terms now, about that, the forward-looking, what is the minimum limit that some of those reserves require. And given the universe has changed quite a lot over recent years or weeks, you know, that whole revisiting of how we package this up, what those minimum viable kind of reserves that we need is what I'd be interested in, and how that impacts on our investment income.
Just a couple of things. I've spent a bit of time with reserves for the last 10 years. There is reserves and there's surpluses here. This is the difference in where I always come back to my land, Southland biosecurity. These are accumulated surpluses. So the money that hasn't been spent compared to reserve that's for a specific thing. That's what I know we used it to bring the rates down last time. It was really, I know there was a talk that they wanted to throw them into general rates, but we stood there, you know, council stood at the ground saying we've been waiting for that. They've got to be spent in that. So again, I'm talking there again. I like their surpluses, they should have been used to benefit the community. And that's work that can be done this year, could be brought in again into the programs this year to offset rates. So that's, I just want to clarify with people to realise what those are. What was that? And I would be suggesting to do that. The other thing is, life's changed in the last month around the world. We've got fuel shortages in Alex, Winton, and Gore, even this last day. Life's going to go, and you only need to look at the world. It's not going to change in a hurry, if not get worse. And people are really feeling it. We've got, you know, people breaking into petrol. You know, it's all about fuel, but at the moment, and so I'm probably looking at this, and I'm challenging our rate increase again, from an aspect that I go, we should be doing everything we can. This next 12 months could be quite interesting for our community. And just actually, that's the other thing I was going, our reserves, now that we've got local government funding, changes the ability why we hang on to money. If we need money, we can borrow basically tomorrow from that if we want up to 50 odd million. That's should be our go-to if we have a disaster. Maybe not, I mean, some people say, oh no, it's good to have the money sitting. We'll hold on to the community's money, just in case we need that couple million or 5 million or whatever it costs the 2020 floods, a disaster coming through, we've had wind disaster. Probably more to the point that we've actually got 2 facilities now. I don't know whether we need it. And that's where the long-term plan discussion, do we actually need these reserves? As we are, it's community's money, but we're hanging on to it when we've got another source. At, you know, reasonably short notice, we can get the funds to fix our community up. And then we've got to pay for it then. But we're actually paying for it now every day, hanging on to reserves. So But that's long-term plan discussion. We have talked about that since LGF, we signed up that. So, but I'd be challenging those surpluses because of what's going to happen to our community. I think there's some real crap coming down the line. We've only just started to see it. So, yeah. So I'll just put it out there, Morris and Phil.
I was just going to add, we also, that exercise of being quite explicit around what is a reserve and what is a surplus, thank you for clarifying that, Jeremy, is quite important, especially when we consider the potential outcomes of local government amalgamation, simplification, investigation, whatever system is dominant at the end of that journey. We're in a different shape, and in one scenario there's a commissioner set over the top who makes decisions. They could say, no, we're going to use that to deliver certain functions, and if we're not very explicit and clear that a certain amount of funding is held for a specific risk-related reserve purpose, then I would say it's at risk of being lost. So that's why I'm really quite keen to have the exercise to.
I think that's a good idea. But I have to say that I'm not too worried about people siphoning petrol out of my car. So
Sure. It's for cars.
The other thing, Mr. Chairman, is as an example, I think what you're talking about in the Makareba Special Fund is 127K, they're going to go to 130. If my recollection is right, I think that came from the harvesting of a pine forest in the Makareba catchment, and that money was put into this fund. That, if you replant that area, then in 30 years' time you'll get another 100 Ks from it, or maybe more, or something like that. So that money there, I think that's what you're talking about before, that money there could be used over a 30-year period to help the other works in the Makareba catchment. I'm not sure what's happening, but I think that's an example of what could be happening in relation to some of those funds.
Can I ask a point of clarification around that though, Morris? It's my belief, and I didn't get to the meeting, but I read the minutes, that special reserve, that liaison committee are using it for the likes of special projects in their area. So it's being used in the area by the area generator. So
if I can clarify that, they're pretty protective of. So it's 110,000 or it builds up, but they have used it for activities that they do want to. We encourage them to use it within the area anyway. So.
Is it being used in the right way though? Is it, as I say, if you've got another 100 hectares or 100,000 worth of trees, I don't know. They probably know that, sorry.
Because it was talked about, I just can't remember. There was something that was asked.
Yes, there was. I can't remember.
Something was asked to use some of that money.
Yeah.
So there's definitely
as advised by the commission.
Yeah. Yes. They're very protective of that too. So, Jeff.
Thanks, Chair. And look, I fully endorse your remarks about looking at these reserve accounts and just seeing if we can offset some of that for rates relief, because it's certainly my belief that we should be aiming to get under 4% anyway. So, I fully endorse that. And just the level of reserves we need to keep for any disasters. Anything major will come from central government, and I look at this list, and in my mind, the AF8, if it went, that would be a real catastrophe for the whole country. So we, no matter how much we increase it, it probably wouldn't make much difference at all. But look, absolutely, we need to look at all these reserves and certainly try and keep the rates rises down this year, because no one knows what's going to happen with the local government commission. This can all be soaked up in a unitary authority or anything in the future.
Right.
Can I just ask intergenerational equity? Is that saying that we can't afford to pay for it up front now, but if it's an investment in infrastructure, it's going to be spread out over a few decades, that other future generations will benefit from it. Therefore, we can justify borrowing money and paying it back over a longer period. Is that what we're kind of talking about, intergenerational equity? So we're saying we can share the costs. Future generations will help us pay for what we're investing in today. And I'll just observe, you know, that seems a little bit, in some respects, we're also imposing other costs with, you know, what we're doing to the environment today. This generation is doing things that other future generations are still going to have to respond to in an uncosted way, you know, trying to remediate and catch up on and make gains on the environmental damage that is occurring. So I just think we've got to be a bit careful, because I think we're open to being challenged on when we talk about or justify something on the basis of intergenerational equity. I think it's we have to be aware that that's a two-way street, and we have to own the expenses we're imposing on future generations and be a bit more honest with ourselves on that one.
Good.
Could I just clarify the actions, I think, in the conversation. So it sounds like there's an appetite to task Jodie and myself to do a fairly thorough reserve assessment as part of the long-term plan process.
Yes.
It also sounds like there's an appetite for us to take a good look at the accumulated surplus numbers that you're seeing there and test whether we could use those to take rates down a bit further than the 4.9 we currently balanced at. Are those the two key actions?
Well, certainly. I mean, they've got to be, as I say, there's still surpluses, money to be used. And we're rating, we have carried on rating in those departments when we haven't actually used the money. That's something different for a reserve. Just carry overs, basically. So I know there was a big challenge. The biosecurity one was one that they said, oh, we'd like a bit of a buffer in case there's an incursion or something like that. And that probably fair enough. They talked about having 700k or something, I remember. And that could be quite relevant. And hey, if they need to, something happen, then they can throw some money at it. But the catchment integration, I thought that was in the land sus team. And yeah, it was something that I said there shouldn't be any surpluses there. Should be being used for the betterment of the community out there. Being rated for it. Yeah. Yes. So there's a couple of limitations. I would like to see where that gets used. There's support for that. Yeah, no.
Another budgetary question then. I take it we're not going to talk budgets yet too much when we've got to. I'm just interested to know, have we actually got positions that are vacant in the budget that probably won't be filled in any budget, just to get a feel on extra amounts that are sitting around? Like, where's that at, Patrick?
Yeah, look, I'll answer that with two explanations. So the first is there's a standard approach that we take in the budgeting exercise where we've got an 8% vacancy factor. So, so a starting assumption in the construction budget is that we're going to have at least 8% vacancies. But the second answer is, in terms of the budget accuracy exercise that Jodie and I have stepped through with the GMs in the last 6 weeks, we've taken further roles over and above that as part of bringing the rates increase down to the 4.5%. So we've taken a good look and said, look, realistically, are some of these roles going to turn up? And we remove the budget for that and bring down the rates increase. So it's all been part of that exercise.
Clarification on that then. So if you're saying 8%, 200, so that's 15 roles at 110, so there's 1.6 million of roles that are currently in the budget.
Yeah. So that's our starting assumption when we've got the plan. Thanks, Jay.
Any Ewan?
So just a clarification again. So you talked about you've already taken some of those roles out of the budget.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, of the 16.
So just to be clear, the vacancy factor doesn't take a specific rollout of the budget. It assumes that when we fill our vacancies, we're going to have a certain number that won't get filled at any time over the course of the year. So it doesn't tie to a specific role. It's just a a factor in the planning that we won't
I think you've taken some of the budget out for that allocation of roles.
Yeah, so the, again, we've applied the same principle with the additional roles that we've taken out in science and strategy and regulation. Effectively, what we're saying is the vacancy package should be a higher rate than that for those functions, because looking at the history of the roles that we've carried, we're not going to recruit at those numbers.
Any other questions?
Slides.
Oh, okay, sorry. I'll scoot anyway.
I think we have kind of covered this one anyway. It was just sort of detailing around the specifics of the overall policy, that it is updated through this annual plan process, which is what we're sort of doing here and will continue to do. The conversation again around that long-term financial sustainability, which is what we've already discussed through that LTP process. So I'm just going to skim over that one, going into the last one there, which yeah, great, thank you. This was sort of where I was going to almost address Jeremy's concern, which is now not going to get to my response, but that's okay. We've kind of covered this as well. You know, we've covered the special reserves. They're largely allocated for those specific purposes. Yes, they are 100% different from the accumulated surpluses. We're aware of that. Yes, the lease area reserves could be accessed, as I've said, by discussion around this table, if they're to be allocated to a different usage, because they're not specifically rated. They are a different source of income. Reiterate that we could rebuild the general reserves for future usage, given our better than planned position. That could be a consideration around our year-end usage of our fund. But again, which is sort of a response to Jeremy's detail around the debt usage, that we do have that function to draw down on the future implications of doing some of those decisions could come back to bite us in the future. Is the short version. Yes, we have the option of using these reserves now, but when we're facing a rates capping potential, things like that, the drawing down of debt to fund, and it could be that our ability to repay that debt is then compromised because things like these reserves are actually no longer available. So it's just my financial little red flag is sort of waving around the possibility of that in the future. I just want to make that really clear that it could be just my personal view, but it is a view that I would like to be considered. But otherwise, I think that is it for me. If there were any other questions.
So I guess the question, do you feel you've got sufficient guidance, sufficient work? Sorry.
Yes, I do. Thank you. We will take a specific look at those accumulated surpluses and see if there are any opportunities in there. Is the key takeaway.
You've got are we on to other business?
We're just about to. So thank you, Jodie.
Can I just observe that? I know, Jeff, you made that comment about disaster reserves and earthquakes and stuff. The trend that we've been seeing from central government is every time a disaster hits, they are contributing less and less to the regional or local response in terms of something that was red zoned, contributing 100%, 50% less than that. And the signals we're getting is that arguably is you're on your own regions in the future. And especially if it was an Alpine Fold 8 event where the entire South Island is covered, then there's no way that central government's going to be able to afford to come to a help. I sense that we're on our own. We just kind of do what you need to do within the regional resources, because every other bugger in the South Island is going to be asking for similar support.
So there don't have to be huge amounts of funding.
Either a huge amount of funding, or we accept it's going to take huge amounts of time to recover.
It'll be both. Yeah.
So what happened in the Christchurch earthquake? We had a large local government fund that got swallowed by that one event, and then we had to put in even more money to try and build it. But in the meantime, we got no fund. Yeah. So it's Mother Nature can make it so that
and just don't. And the current climate is there's no coffers in Wellington cash.
Mm-hmm. The next agenda item, Hayley.
Yes, it's an AOB. I just have to clarify.
AOB.
I got something wrong. it was in answer to Councillor Roy. Just want to clarify, we do respond to incidents if the storage facility for stock truck effluent overflows, but if the truck overflows on the road, it is the territorial authorities. So they follow that.
Thank you for that.
So my apologies. We're getting that wrong. We have sensors, there's a sensor in it, so that's how we know to go and empty it. Thank you.
I'll respond. Thank you for that. So my next question is, as regulator, should we be writing to the territorial authorities noting our serious concern at what is happening on the road and pointing out to them that it is their responsibility, and short of them doing that, there shall be some regulatory responses from us?
I would like to answer yes.
So just on that, the other forum for us to have that conversation discussion is through the Regional Transport Committee, because all of the TAs are members of that Regional Transport Committee. So we can certainly take that and raise that as an issue with that group.
All power to you, Mr. Chairman.
That's
of the
also a mayoral forum
Committee.
conversation.
Well, I don't know if it would be yet elevated to that. I think we have the discussion at the Regional Transport Committee level first, and then if I get beaten down and people don't want to listen, of course, then we can say, well, actually, we need to do more than this. But there could be an appetite to lean into it and address it in more creative, innovative ways.
It's currently the practice more than the exception.
I can comment. So Rob was mentioning we had meetings in this room at one day to do with stock going grazing, because that's when all this comes to a pinnacle, and about a bit of a working party thing with everybody looking at what they could do better and putting out the message around emptying your stock out, and for transport companies to be using things with tanks, because at one stage they had some trucks that didn't even have tanks. So we know how that would end. And looking at ways of trying to head this off. The one thing that we can't control is the weather, and when you get the big rain events, then absolutely it makes it really difficult. But those sort of proactive things did work, I think. So just saying that it's been a good practice in the past.
I think a key message that I picked up from today was that there's an expectation that industry take a degree of ownership rather than expecting it's all funded from public funds, in this instance, both NZTA through the taxpayer and the regional council through the ratepayer.
Sure. But with a lens of practical, economical solutions that might require thinking outside the box. Yes.
Through you, Chair, absolutely. This will require intensive collaboration and holistic problem solving to respect this matter, and we're absolutely committed to doing that. Dead keen.
Chair, in that regional transport authority or whatever it's termed, is Transit New Zealand involved in that?
Yes, NZTA is a standing member of the Regional Transport Committee membership, and we have NZ Rail is not, Kiwi Rail is not, but we're engaging with them to engage more frequently so that they are part of the conversations, because it intersects things like the Mataura Railway crossing, like with the state highway intersections. NZTA have got funding to do the upgrade of that intersection. Kiwi Rail haven't put it in their budget for the next financial year. So that's an issue. Again, it comes back to this collaboration thing and trying to forecast ahead with the stakeholders who are involved in these projects so that no one is left in an awkward situation where they're being dumped with either pay this bill in the coming financial year or it doesn't happen, which isn't helpful to anyone.
Yeah, just really clarifying for that effluent spillage that all the TAs and Transit New Zealand are covering that as well.
Any other agenda items?
In general business.
General business.
Yeah, just to let you know that we've had some initial conversations with Thriving Southland around a contribution next year. So that's yet to come through in any detail, but I just wanted to socialise that with you, and we can, as it shapes up, we can come through and talk about what it is and how it might fill in all.
Forecasting that they've found an altruistic donor who's going to totally fund that, and we won't have any cost to contribute, or is that the opposite?
That's probably one optimistic scenario. We can't confirm that there's a likelihood.
Still buying lotto tickets.
So just letting you know that conversation, but nothing.
Right.
Definitely.
So with regards to Hayley's proposed presentation today, I just confirmed with Hayley it wasn't part of an April Fool's joke.
Yeah, we're now 15 minutes past the time at which you can deliver April Fool's jokes. Just reminding everyone as we.
No, I'd suggest that foolery doesn't.
So that brings us to a close for this workshop. We'll be going offline as soon as we close this one, and just remind the council there's a briefing at 1 o'clock back in this location.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You're offline.
Well, oh.